Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today I'm going to be discussing the Pan American Championships which took place in Missoula, Montana this weekend. Many people have been asking me when will Issam be back. He knows he's missed, but he is still in Morocco because of family circumstances. He should normally be back this weekend when we discuss the X2O Trophy in Lokeren on Sunday and the Super Prestige in Niel on Monday. Today I'll be discussing the Pan American Championships by myself. I've experimented a bit with the format, different host, AI voice, but because this is quite a short podcast and really just a keynote from 4 broadcasts there, I thought I would do it alone, a bit of a yap session here, but it should hopefully be fine. As if watching 6 races at the European Championships wasn't enough, I also decided to watch the Pan American Championships, which had a quite nice live stream, very nice drone footage there of a stunning location in the evening. I'll go through in the order of the races, so Women Elite, then Men Elite, Women U23, Men U23, and we'll cover a bit of the juniors later, although those races weren't broadcasted. Starting with the Women Elite race, we saw that Clouse from Steve Tilford Foundation Racing had the best start. Holmgren was on the ropes in the first part of the race. The rider of Little Trek clearly struggled with her first real racing of the season. She struggled a lot on the technical sections and that would continue throughout the day. We had 4 leaders as Sydney McGill, Isabella Holmgren, Katie Clouse and Natalie Quinn were in the leading group. Quinn was the first to drop, 3 riders went into the final lap together. Clouse was the best rider technically, she was best through the corners, placed a well-timed attack, didn't work out, tried another move in a steep downhill, sending it down the inside from 3rd to 1st, spectacular move, but also that move didn't stick. She couldn't compensate against Holmgren and McGill, who took over just in front of pit 2. McGill had the leading position, kept the pace high and took victory ahead of Isabella Holmgren and Katie Clouse. As I said, Katie Clouse had the best technical abilities in the leading group. It was clear that in the few technical sections, she was more comfortable than McGill and Holmgren. She was able to put them under pressure, stretch gaps, and you could also see that when she was in the wheels, she was barely leaving any distance between herself and the rider in front. That is always a sign that a rider is controlled through the corners if they don't leave a safety margin. Clouse, however, as we have already seen throughout most of this season, does not have the physical capabilities to match riders like Sydney McGill and Isabella Holmgren. She was 1% short. Her form has been improving this season, but it still just wasn't enough to take the title here. I liked her tactics. She was smart. Yes, she did the work early on with a faster start, but sat in decently. Positioning with 3 is never really an issue. She made her moves on the technical sections. She tried an all or nothing move in the final lap, sending it past 2 riders, but it didn't work out for her in the end, which made it a Canadian showdown for the win. Holmgren, it was encouraging what I saw here. It was clear that she was very rusty, however. This was her first weekend of UCI racing. My understanding is that she did 1 week of Canadian racing, but that's not really comparable. Last year when she became Pan American champion here, she was fighting against Clara Honsinger. She destroyed Honsinger by nearly a minute, but she had already done plenty of races before. We saw her on the podium in Rochester, which was then televised. We saw her get a top 10 in the Waterloo World Cup, and she won her first UCI Elite race in Cincinnati. And this year, there was none of that. It's been a long season. She's been more active on the road and on the mountain bike, so that makes sense. You could visibly see that she was the strongest rider throughout this race. She is a bit of a diesel. She needs time to warm up, and that was the same here, but that was not the main problem here for her. Her problem was that through the corners and the technical sections, she was unable to expand on gaps that she could create through her power, or that she needed to close gaps on the straights because of her cornering not being on par with the other 2 in the leading group. Holmgren is maybe not the best technical rider, but she can certainly do better than what I saw on the broadcast here in Missoula. That being said, McGill rode a very good race as well. She profited from that playing the positioning game well, because after Clouse placed the attack in the downhill, there was about, I would say, a quarter of a lap left. We were on a straightaway before we came to pit 2. Holmgren overtook Clouse just before it, and then McGill came with a very late move taking the lead. And from there, she never gave that lead away. The finishing straight here was quite short. It was from a very slow corner, a 180 corner. That means that it's extra hard to pass somebody because you can't launch at high speed. And McGill made perfect use of the fact that the technical abilities of Holmgren were not what they were supposed to be to compete for the title here. McGill went all out, and yes, Holmgren could match her on the straight, but in the corners, Holmgren had to leave gaps, and Holmgren could bunny up the barriers, which was, just like last year, an encouraging thing to see, but her bunny hopping skills were also not fast enough for that to make a difference. So McGill was maybe not the best technical rider or the best physical rider, but she had the complete package, and that helped her earn the win here. If we take a look at the entire top 10, we saw Sydney McGill on top ahead of Isabella Holmgren and Katie Clouse, as said. Natalie Quinn ended 4th ahead of Anna McGill and Raylyn Nuss. Caitlin Walcroft ended 7th ahead of Christiane Bildo, which I probably mispronounced, but a Canadian rider there. Anna Dorvisky ended 9th ahead of Brenna Wyke-Simpson. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the riders in the top 10 here, considering the field wasn't too deep. I would like to say Raylyn Nuss underperformed a bit this weekend. Like last year, she's been declining a bit, but still she was the 2nd or 3rd American in most of the races so far. And I don't know, it definitely didn't seem to be her weekend here. I think the course should be fine for her, but maybe it was the altitude or maybe just a bad day. This was an underperformance by her. Even considering this season, I would certainly expect her to beat Anna McGill. Natalie Quinn, maybe not as much. Quinn rode a very strong weekend, finishing 4th on both days. On Saturday, there was the warm-up race, in which she was very close to Katie Clouse for a podium spot. And Quinn has been decent. She races for EF on the road, but was racing cross in the CCB Women's Cycling Team kit. She started her season in Charm City, where she finished 10th twice. And since she's also finished in the top 10 on the second day of Cincinnati Cross, and really rad she was in the top 10 twice as well. But this was definitely an overperformance, a strong outing, I would say, this weekend for Natalie Quinn. Then the men's elite race, Scott Funston had the fastest start there. A 4-way battle was expected with Eric Brunner, Curtis White, Andrew Strohmeyer, and then Scott Funston. Funston, however, had a mechanical issue which put him down, and that meant that he would not compete for the podium position. The 3 remaining riders went on until Andrew Strohmeyer exploded about 40 minutes into the race, leaving Brunner and White to fight for the victory. Brunner was hunting his 4th consecutive title and placed a long attack in the final 2 laps. White made a decent impression, especially in the technical sections, but couldn't get the gap completely closed in the final gap once he was distanced a little bit. Brunner took his 4th title ahead of White, with Strohmeyer ending 3rd. Again here, technical skills were interesting to observe between them. The course itself was not super technical for European standards, I would say. There were a lot of flowing corners. There were some run-ups. I thought it was a decent race, a decent course, I must say, for an American race. I liked it a bit. It was a bit more compact on one side, the baseball field side. Last year they also went across the road to the other side. White was much better through these technical sections. You could see his cornering abilities helped him. Also on the barriers, White was jumping a bit faster than Brunner. On the run-ups, he was smoother with the dismount. He's a step-through guy that does help you a little bit. And Brunner, he was just a bit stronger. Nevertheless, White should be satisfied with this result. We've covered it before. He's been sick pre-season. That has affected his preparation. He was quite bad. I'm always skeptical when riders try and fix their form on the go, because many times it just doesn't work. But just like with Nice, it's starting to work for White. He's becoming better every week. He was certainly a lot better this weekend than he's been. We already saw the signs of that at the Really Rad Festival of Cyclocross, where he beat Brunner on the second day. So White should be satisfied. He was quite close, and when it becomes muddy and his technical skills become a bit more crucial to the result, he should be able to do better. It was also nice to hear him join the commentary booth after the finish. He gave a few, I think maybe 4 or 5 minutes he was talking with the commentators about his season, talking that they were going to go to Dublin and Antwerp and that he's hoping to improve a bit more towards nationals. So I'll definitely be interested in following that, see how Curtis White will do at nationals. It's in Louisville again. Apparently the course is going to be a bit different. It can get muddy there, and that could certainly help him in hunting down a second title. Of course, he'll need to defeat Strohmeyer and Funston as well. Strohmeyer was probably the top favorite seen his season, but for Strohmeyer, he blew up, and yes, it could have been the altitude, but at the same time, he's also not as dominant as he was at the start of the season. In the early races, he was just destroying everyone, getting away. Then Brunner came in, and that became a bit less easy to do. He was beaten also by Kerry Werner in Waterloo, and then last week in Really Rad, he won on day one, which was a close battle with Brunner, and on the second day, he didn't finish. So he said he's targeting the European races a lot. He wants to do very well there. I still don't know about Strohmeyer. He's a very, very fast rider. He's good on the fast courses. There's a few riders that have the ability to ride up short hills like he can do it. He and Eli Iserbyt are some of the best riders in the world on those types of obstacles, these short, bunchy, steep hills. And we could see that here as well. He was one of a few riders this weekend to ride up what they called the rattlesnake run up. You had a banked corner, then you had a bit of a downhill into a swooping left-hander, and then you shot up this steep wall. They called it a run up, but clearly it was not a mandatory run up because we saw Strohmeyer ride that just like a couple of U23s, which we'll talk about in a handful of minutes. If we look at the entire top 10, we see that Brunner ahead of White and Strohmeyer was the podium. Funston managed 4th after that mechanical, which was unfortunate for him. Tyler Clark came 5th ahead of Ben Frederick. Evan Russell was 7th ahead of Sam Brown. Jules van Kempen finished 9th with Cody Scott rounding out the top 10. Outside of the top 10, we saw Gage Hecht. This was, I believe, his first race of the season. Didn't have that many points. It must have been a bit of a disappointment for him because last year he still finished on the podium here, although he did do some Spanish and Portuguese races before. Then the women's U23 race, we can be quite short about this one in summary because Lauren Zoerner had the fastest start, broke away from the rest and took victory. Start to finish, dominant performance like we've seen Mathieu van der Poel and Fem van Empel do many times before. Today it was Lauren Zoerner. Still, she didn't have the luxury to cruise at the front because Janaya Francis, last year racing for Waterslide, now racing as an independent rider in a black kit, was close by all race. She was never really more than 20 seconds behind. The final margin of victory was just 15 seconds. Kaya Musgrave finished nearly a minute down in 3rd place. Lauren Zoerner, it was very typical the way to see her ride here. She was pushing the big ring. It's a very old school cyclocross style. It's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but pushing the big gear, moving the shoulders a bit. She's a very big, powerful rider, and yeah, it worked out well for her. Here it's hard to really compare anything to the other races because she was by herself all of the time. It's hard to really compare her technical abilities with anybody else because she was by herself. It looked fine. I didn't really have the impression that Francis was so close all race because that was not really that visible on the broadcast, but it looked solid. I think if Zoerner can make one more step in her development, she can come back and compete for the elite title next year. She's a final year U23. She is very devoted to racing these standalone races. She's spoken about being one of the last riders who's not come through a dedicated junior women's category, and that she appreciates the fact that they're standalone races for women and wants to support them. I encourage those initiatives. I can understand why some riders move up. Maybe not as much when it's in junior women racing the elite race if there's a standalone race. I would be in favor of junior women just having their own race at every venue. That's apparently going to happen quite soon. The UCI has undertaken some action on that. Starting next year, organizers that don't have a standalone junior women's race will be fined a fine equal to the prize money of the junior women's race. And then I think in 2 years after that, they will be finally, they already announced that they would do this, I think 3-4 years ago, but they'll finally do it now. They will have mandated junior women events, just like is the case for junior men. Then the men's U23 race, the last race that was televised. It was my 10th cyclocross race of the day. Can you believe that? 10 cyclocross races. Christmas came early, but by the end of the day my eyes were also hurting a bit from seeing so much cyclocross as the clock was nearing midnight here. We had a very interesting race. There were 7 riders together for almost the entirety of the race until the penultimate lap. Ian Ackerts attacked up the rattlesnake run-up. He was able to ride it, one of a few riders, as I said, to do it, but he was the only one to do it consistently. He did it almost every single lap. He was in the lead there. That attack was followed by a reaction from Henry Coote, but it was just nothing they could do against Ackerts. He flew to victory. Coote had to let Spranger get ahead in the final lap, so the podium was Ian Ackerts ahead of Jack Spranger and Henry Coote. Ian Ackerts with the win here. Last year he also won. I don't think it's that big of a surprise that he took the win here. I was surprised that he was back in competition so quickly, because he did not take a long break following the end of the mountain bike season in Canada and the US, but he's doing fine. I obviously expect them to know what they're doing there. He's in good hands at the Trek Future team, and his races so far have been going quite well. A bit inconsistent in Indianapolis and Cincinnati, finishing 6th, 2nd, 5th and 2nd, so 2 podium places, but also 2 slightly worse results. Nevertheless, he's shown good form. In the second day of Kings, he finished less than 20 seconds behind Eric Brunner, and I think that he could have competed for the elite title here in Missoula, because the day before he was able to take the victory, beating Scott Funson. Curtis White and Eric Brunner were also in the race. Brunner crashed a lot, which doesn't surprise me if I saw his technical abilities the day after that. But Ackerts was good, and the lap time comparison doesn't really completely hold, because the U23 race was a lot more tactical. It was shorter, you could preserve a bit more energy, but the final 2 lap times of Ian Ackerts would have been the fastest and 3rd fastest lap times in the elite races. He was faster than Eric Brunner had been in any of his laps, including the final one. So Ackerts, with the blonde mullet, the extreme blonde mullet, he's gone 10 times overboard than Mathieu van der Poel did. He looked good, and his technical abilities, we know that they are great, they are refined. He was able to showcase some of his strength by riding up that run-up. That was an easy 4-second gain each lap. That's significant pressure that you put on the rest. And of course it makes sense that at some point you're just going to pull that card and move through with it. He beat Jack Spranger. Spranger also had a good weekend. The Bear national team rider has been focusing more on mountain bike, which I think is a great shame. I don't think that's the right move. Combining it with other sports is a good way to keep going, to keep active, to improve your abilities to corner on the mountain bike, to improve your form. Also, road racing is a great substitute. It just works best if you're a multidisciplinary rider, especially in a U23, and I would also argue especially for Jack Spranger, who doesn't stand out to me as the biggest talent on the mountain bike. I think he could do very good things on the cyclocross bike. Nevertheless, he had a good weekend, regardless of his decision. He finished 7th on the first day, showing some potential, and then 2nd here. He's a powerful rider. His technical skills were nothing special this weekend. He did beat Henry Coote. Expectations for the first year U23 were perhaps a bit too high following his win last week. There can be a dozen reasons why he wasn't able to perform like he was last week. Maybe he peaked too early, maybe it was the altitude, maybe it was the weather, maybe it was a bad day, whatever, it doesn't matter. As a first-year U23, Henry Koot is doing exactly what he needs to do. He's showing glances of his talent, showing what he's capable of. And quite frankly, if you win a race, an elite race against that competition, the best riders were there, most of them, then your season is already a success. Of course, he has goals, winning the national title, doing well at the U23 World Cups, and those are all very valid goals to have. And he's not the only version of U23 doing well. For instance, Luke Walter finished 5th here. Miles Maddern wasn't racing here. But it's for these riders just important that they can showcase themselves a number of times at the front of the race. But it doesn't have to be consistently performing at your best as a first year U23. That's more a thing for a third and fourth year U23. Then you need to capitalize. You need to get your results. You need to showcase yourself for when you become a U23 or an elite, when you move out of the U23 category. He's been doing very well, because if we look at the entire top 10, we see that he beats some fine riders, because behind Ackerts, Spranger and Koot, we find Dylan Zakrasek. Luke Walter was 5th, Adam Moot 6th, Daniel English was 7th, ahead of Ryan Drummond, Adrian Megun and Justin Peck. With 7 leaders, positioning game was quite key. It was not as crucial as in many of the European races, because there were quite some straightaways and the number of corners here were way more slooping, way faster flowing than that they are in Europe. And Henry Koot, for instance, was one of the riders that I thought in the beginning, he's sitting quite far back. He's in 4th or 5th. Maybe in a European race I would encourage him to move forward a bit, because in the European race you always want to be in the front 3 positions of such a group to be alert. But he was in control, he moved forward quite well. Dylan Zakrasek, I think, could have finished on the podium. He made his move just a little bit too early. He was on the attack a lap before Ackerts placed his decisive attack, but at some point you're going to need to try and make a move. And that it didn't work out, well, sometimes it happens. It was a good outing by him, and really we should be in for a thrilling battle at the American Championships, because from those 7 leaders, 6 of them were American, so that is something I look forward to. Then to conclude, some short notices on the junior races. These were not broadcast, so I'll keep it quite short. The junior women's title went to Alyssa Sarkisov, who beat Raphael Carrier and Ashlyn Hallan. I think this is an interesting result. Last year Carrier swept these races. She only lost the first day in Rochester to Lydia Cusack. This was the first race of the season of Carrier. After that she won, I think, nearly 10 races in a row or something on the American scene, before doing very well on the European scene as well, finishing in the top 10 of the World Cups in Namur and Antwerp. She showed herself in the race in Baal, finishing 10th after Imogen Wolf had a mechanical in the final lap. She was 5th in the World Cup in Hoogheide, but couldn't replicate such success at the World Championships. With those results, she positioned herself as one of the favorites for the world title this year, but this year it's not been as easy for her. Alyssa Sarkisov comes off a strong road campaign, finishing in the top 15 of the Road World Championships. She started her season with a win in Cincinnati. She finished 4th in the elite race, something we haven't been able to discuss, but that was a very strong result for her. Sarkisov got the upper hand over Carrier in Falmouth at Really Rad last week on the second day, and she did it twice this weekend. Sarkisov is a fast rider. Her final lap is an attribute. I do think she's better suited to the American courses than the European courses, but it's encouraging to see that she's taken a step forward, or perhaps it's Carrier who's taken a step backwards. Unfortunately, a number of other riders here were missing, which makes it harder to compare these results. For instance, Alyssa White wasn't here. She finished 10th in Troyes last year. She has been ill and therefore missed this race. It would have been interesting to see how she would have fared here, to see if Sarkisov made a step up or Carrier made backwards, or perhaps a bit of both. We saw that two other Canadians, Hallen and Knoll, ended third and fourth, which is showing that there's collective Canadian strength. Knoll finished very well in the World Cup of Namur last year. She's a strong rider, but again, just like Carrier, not the most technically refined. Carrier also a very, very slow starter, which is definitely a vulnerability on the European circuit. I look forward to see how these riders will stack up. One interesting thing, that's a final thing I'll note on the junior women's side, is that Ada Watson, who was flying early in the season, taking wins left, right and center, winning in Go Cross, winning at Charm City, finishing second closely behind Carrier in Rochester, has fallen back after a break of nearly a month, finishing 6th and 7th this weekend. The next races will tell us if for her it was a case of peaking too early or liking the heat early on in the season, or if this was just a bad weekend at altitude in cold conditions. Then to wrap up this podcast, the men's junior category. There we had a battle between Benjamin Braafman and Garrett Beshore. This was decided in the final corner when Benjamin Braafman slid out, turning onto the tarmac, with Beshore taking victory. They almost raced when it was dark. We saw Emilien Belize finishing third, first year from Canada. I'm a bit wary and tough to really see where we're going to place these riders in the European circuit this year. Beshore and Braafman have no World Cup experience. Braafman is a good rider on fast courses. I have not seen him race in the mud, so I cannot make any judgments on that. He is a good mountain biker. He's become a bit more consistent this year. Last year he had the tendency to crash a lot. That's definitely a lot smoother this year. He's a peaker for championships events. And that makes me remind myself that I did see him race a muddy race, namely the American Championships last year, in which he crashed, but rode a very strong comeback to finish 5th. Without that crash, I think he could have easily finished on the podium. His European campaign did not go well, he fell ill, but I'm curious to see how they will do this year. We have seen at the European Championships already that the results of a first year do not have to mean anything of the results of a second year. The Italians, Agostinaccio and last year Viezzi, both didn't stand out as a first-year junior. Braafman could perhaps be the same. Maybe if everything goes his well, he could do something in the European races. I think he and Beshore should be the best American riders, although Dylan Haynes has also shown some glances of talent, but in Missoula he finished 4th. Good, I think that will cover it for the Pan American Championships. A long single yap session here by myself. Almost went in one take. I'm quite happy. Luckily, Issam will be back this weekend because I really prefer to have him next to me to analyze all the racing. Thanks for listening. We will be back this weekend. We will be covering a number of races. On Sunday, the XTO Trophy in Lokeren. And on Monday, the Super Prestige in Niel. Monday is a national holiday in Belgium. There will not be a podcast on Saturday because, as far as I'm aware, there's no big televised race, or maybe not even a single televised race at all. Thanks for listening and see you guys soon. Goodbye.